Hells Angels are the most powerful outlaw motorcycle club on Earth. But fear runs both ways, because a few of their enemies did to the Angels what the Angels do to everyone else. One of them killed a chapter president in the middle of the street. Another lived through both an ambush and a bomb big enough to flatten a building, walking away while the people around him died. And across Scandinavia, an entire club fought them to a draw for 3 years and 4 countries, until the most powerful biker organization on the planet had to do the one thing it swore it never would: sit down with its enemy and make peace. These are the brutal bikers the Hells Angels fear. Ernesto Gonzalez. Jeffrey Pettigrew was one of the 5 most powerful Hells Angels in the United States, the president of the San Jose chapter, a man law enforcement called the godfather of the Angels in that city. In September 2011, at the Street Vibrations rally in Sparks, Nevada, he walked across the floor of the Nugget Casino and into a confrontation with members of the Vagos motorcycle club. And within seconds, the argument turned to gunfire. When it was over, Pettigrew was dead, shot in the back, and 2 Vagos were wounded. The rally was canceled, a state of emergency was declared, and the most powerful outlaw club on Earth had just lost one of its senior leaders on a public casino floor to a club it had spent decades looking down on. That contempt is exactly where the Vagos came from. They were founded in San Bernardino, California in 1965, and like the Mongols, their origins traced to the era when the Hells Angels would admit only white members. The men who built the Vagos were the men the Angels turned away, largely Hispanic, largely dismissed. And they answered the rejection the same way the Mongols did, by building a club of their own and growing it into hundreds of members across roughly 24 chapters. The HA had helped create their own enemy, and by the 2000s that enemy was pushing into Angels territory in Northern California. So the feud ran hot for years, through brawls and shootouts and drive-bys that authorities called the worst biker war the state had seen in a decade. The killing of Pettigrew was the peak of it, and the aftermath is what makes the Vagos genuinely dangerous rather than just violent. The shooter, Ernesto Gonzalez, was convicted in a Nevada state court, but when federal prosecutors tried to tie 8 Vagos members to the murder under a sweeping racketeering case, arguing the club itself was a criminal enterprise that had killed a Hells Angels leader, a Las Vegas jury acquitted all 8 in February 2020. And the violence never stayed one-sided. Years later, when 6 Vagos were shot in Nevada, it was 3 Hells Angels who were charged with attempted murder, because the Angels do not simply dominate this rival, they trade blood with them. That is why the Vagos open this list. They are the club the Hells Angels built by accident, out of the men they rejected, and it grew into the one that put an Angels president in the ground in front of a casino full of witnesses, and then walked out of federal court with the biggest charges unproven. The Laughlin River Run riot at 2:16 in the morning on April 27, 2002. The security cameras inside Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, Nevada, caught the moment the floor turned into a battlefield. The annual Laughlin River Run had drawn more than 80,000 bikers to the small desert town. And for 2 days, the tension between the Hells Angels and the Mongols had been building through stare-downs and small confrontations, until a Hells Angel kicked a Mongol in the chest, and the whole thing detonated. Within seconds, 60 to 70 bikers were fighting across the casino floor with guns, knives, hammers, and wrenches, while gamblers dove under blackjack tables and shell casings bounced across the carpet around them. The brawl lasted only minutes, but when it was over, 3 men were dead. 1 Mongol had been stabbed to death, and 2 Hells Angels had been shot and killed, with at least a dozen more hospitalized. Police recovered a small arsenal from inside and outside the building, guns and knives and blunt weapons abandoned as the 2 clubs scattered. This was not a back alley ambush or a quiet hit. It was 2 of the most powerful outlaw clubs on Earth going to war on a casino floor, in the open, in front of thousands of witnesses and a wall of cameras. What makes Laughlin matter to the Hells Angels is what it proved. The Mongols were not a nuisance to be swatted aside. They were an enemy willing to trade bodies with the Angels in the most public setting imaginable, and they walked out of that casino having killed 2 Hells Angels on camera. The event was so violent that the authorities canceled the rest of the river run, and the mayor of Sparks declared a state of emergency. The Angels had walked into Harrah's expecting to dominate the room the way they dominated most rooms. They walked out having learned that the Mongols would meet them gun for gun, and that some rivals do not back down, no matter who is standing across from them. At Emerson, Redbeard, Morris. The Hells Angels thought they could end the Mongols by killing the man who built them. Instead, they created the reason the Mongols have hated them ever since. In the mid-1970s, Emerson Morris, known everywhere as Redbeard for the massive red beard that made him unmistakable, was president of the Mongols' San Diego chapter, and under him the club was growing into something the Angels could no longer ignore. The Mongols had been founded by Hispanic bikers the Hells Angels refused to admit. So from the start there was bad blood. And by 1977, Morris had built his chapter into a genuine threat to Angels' dominance in Southern California. That made him a target. They came for him on September 5, 1977. Morris was riding home from a bike run with a fellow Mongol named Raymond Smith, and Morris's wife Dolores was on the back of his motorcycle when a group of Hells Angels who had been tracking them opened fire on an isolated stretch of highway. Gunfire tore through both bikes. Morris and Smith died on the road, and Dolores survived but was left paralyzed by the bullets. The Angels had killed 2 Mongol leaders and crippled an innocent woman in a single ambush. But they were not finished, and what they did next is what turned a killing into a war. While Morris and Smith lay at the mortuary awaiting burial, someone delivered a bouquet of red and white flowers, the Hells Angels' own colors, a final insult to the dead. Then a car bomb exploded outside the mortuary, wounding 2 more Mongols who had come to pay their respects. The Angels had turned a funeral into a battlefield, and in doing so, they made certain the Mongols would never forget. That was the miscalculation. The murder of Redbeard Morris was supposed to break the Mongols, and instead, it forged them. Before that ambush, they were just another club fighting for room. After it, they became warriors in a blood feud, carrying a grievance that has driven their war with the Hells Angels for decades since. The Angels had tried to erase a rival by killing its leader, and all they created was an enemy with a permanent reason to come back for them, one that would eventually kill Angels' presidents of its own. The murder of Jerry Tobin. Every other enemy on this list came later. The Outlaws were there first. They are the Hells Angels' oldest rival on Earth, a war that has run for decades across the United States and into Europe, and it is the one feud the Angels have never been able to end, only survive. The Outlaws live by a motto that tells you everything about the depth of it. God forgives, Outlaws don't. Between these 2 clubs, there has never been real peace, only pauses between the bodies, and each pause has ended the same way it began, with one side answering the other in blood. The clearest measure of how seriously the Hells Angels take the Outlaws is not something the Outlaws did. It is something the Angels' own founder did to them. In the late 1980s, after an Angel was shot dead by an outlaw, Sonny Barger, the man who built the Hells Angels into a global empire and the most powerful figure the club ever produced, entered into a conspiracy to bomb an outlaw's clubhouse and kill its members in retaliation. The plot involved running explosives across state lines to Louisville, Kentucky, and it was serious enough that the FBI planted an informant named Anthony Tate deep inside the club to stop it. In October 1988, a federal jury convicted Barger of conspiring to transport and receive explosives with intent to kill, and he went to prison for 4 years. Think about what that means. The founder of the Hells Angels did not treat the Outlaws as beneath his attention. He treated them as an enemy worth building pipe bombs for, worth the federal prison time that came with it, which is the highest and most dangerous respect one outlaw club can pay another. The war between them has never stayed on American soil either, and the killing that shows its reach happened in England. On August 12, 2007, a Hells Angel named Jerry Tobin was riding home down the M40 motorway from the Bulldog Bash, a festival the Hells Angels themselves sponsored, when a car pulled alongside his motorcycle at nearly 90 miles an hour, and a gunman fired a revolver into the back of his neck. Tobin, a 35-year-old Canadian mechanic known in the club as Gentleman Jerry, died on the road. He had no criminal record. He had done nothing to the men who killed him, and that was the point, because the 7 outlaws who murdered him, the entire South Warwickshire chapter of the club, had not been hunting Tobin at all. They had lain in wait in separate cars along the route, ready to kill any Hells Angel who left that festival, and Tobin was simply the one who rode past. As the prosecutor put it, he was killed not for who he was, but for what he was. A man wearing the wrong patch on a road, the outlaws claimed. The response told you how much the loss meant to the Angels. Up to 1,000 Hells Angels rode in Tobin's funeral procession through London, a show of force from a club burying one of its own, over a killing that had no reason behind it beyond the colors on his back. And that is the logic of the entire Outlaws rivalry in a single event. No provocation was ever needed. No debt, no dispute, no personal grievance. The patch alone was enough to get a man executed on a public motorway. That is why the Outlaws sit this high on a list about the enemies the Hells Angels fear. Most of the clubs on it rose in a single region or a single decade, burned hot, and were absorbed or crushed. The Outlaws have been there the entire time, on multiple continents, for more than half a century, refusing to fold, refusing to forgive, and forcing even the founder of the Hells Angels to answer them with explosives and a prison sentence. They are not a chapter of the Angels' story. They are the enemy the Angels have never once been able to write out of it. Christopher Stoney, Ablett. A Mongol wearing his full colors walked into a bar in the Mission District of San Francisco on the night of September 2, 2008. And that alone was an act of war, because the mission was Hells Angels territory, and the man doing it knew exactly what it would bring. Christopher Ablett had come all the way from Modesto carrying a foot-long military knife and a .357 revolver, and he had put on a vest that only hardcore Mongols were permitted to wear. He was not there to drink. He was there to be seen by the one man whose territory he was insulting, and he had brought the weapons to finish what the insult started. That man was Mark Guardado, known to everyone as Papa, the 46-year-old president of the San Francisco Hells Angels, one of the oldest and most respected chapters in the country. Word reached Guardado that a Mongol was in his neighborhood, in his bar, openly wearing enemy colors, so he did what a Hells Angels president was expected to do. He went to confront him, and Ablett was waiting for exactly that. What followed lasted less than 5 minutes, and when it was over, the president of the San Francisco Angels lay dead on the pavement at 24th and Treat, stabbed 4 times and shot twice, while the man who killed him disappeared into the city. Then came the strangest part of the story. Ablett went on the run, and the FBI launched a manhunt, and for a while it looked as though the Mongols had swallowed him whole, moving him between safe houses, hiding him from both the police and the Hells Angels who were hunting him for revenge. He could have stayed gone. The club had the resources and the reach to keep him hidden or move him out of the country. Instead, 32 days after the killing, Ablett walked into a police station in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, more than 1,600 miles from San Francisco, and turned himself in. Some believed he could not handle life on the run. Others believed the Mongols ordered him to surrender to avoid an all-out war with the Angels. Whatever the reason, he was extradited back to California to face murder charges, held on $5 million bail. In 2012, a federal jury convicted him of first-degree murder, and what the jury also found is the part that matters most on a list like this. They determined Ablett had not killed Guardado out of fear or in self-defense. He had done it to raise his own standing inside the Mongols. The phone calls he made in the minutes after the killing, dozens of them, were not the calls of a panicked man. They were the calls of a man reporting a victory, Because in that world, killing a Hells Angels president made you a legend. The jury went further still and found that the Mongols operated as a racketeering enterprise, one that encouraged its members to commit exactly this kind of violence to build the club's reputation. Ablett's murder of Guardado was not a rogue act. It was how the Mongols were designed to work. That is why Ablett belongs this high on a list about the enemies the Angels fear. He proved the thing the Hells Angels least want proven, that even a chapter president, even on his own street, in his own city, surrounded by his own people, is not safe. The killing of Papa Guardado escalated the Mongols-Angels war to a new level, and it drew somewhere between 1,400 and 2,000 bikers to his funeral. A massive show of force from a club that had just been reminded its leaders could be reached and killed. When Ablett was finally sentenced to life without parole, he showed no remorse. Given the chance to speak, he said only that he did what needed to be done. The Mongols had been born out of the men the Angels rejected, forged into an army by the murder of Redbeard Morris, and in Ablett they finally answered the oldest insult of all. They killed a king on his own ground and called it business. Frédéric Faucher. On paper, it should have taken the Hells Angels a few months. In Quebec, a small club called the Rock Machine had refused the Angels' demand to control the entire province's drug trade, and the Angels held every advantage that mattered. More men, more money, an international brand, and chapters across the country ready to send reinforcements the moment they were needed. The Rock Machine had a few dozen members and a founder locked in an American prison. It was not a war anyone expected to last. It was an execution waiting to happen. It lasted 8 years, and by the end, the Hells Angels had learned a lesson that the largest outlaw organization on Earth is not supposed to need. A small enough club with nothing to lose can bleed you for years and refuse to die. The Rock Machine did not fight the way a smaller club is supposed to fight. Instead of hiding and hoping to survive, they went after the Angels where it hurt most, and they did it with a nerve that stunned the entire underworld. They burned down an escort empire owned by one of the biggest Hells Angels pimps in Montreal. They bombed an Angels bunker so powerfully the blast shook the whole residential neighborhood around it. And in a single night, a Rock Machine man named Frédéric Faucher reduced the Hells Angels Quebec City clubhouse to rubble, an attack that landed like a thunderclap because clubhouses were fortresses, the physical proof of a chapter's permanence, and a club everyone had written off had just erased one off the map. Part of the reason they could not be crushed was a secret the Angels could not see. Behind the bikers who fought and died in the streets stood a network of men who never wore a patch, a group of businessmen and professionals and independent dealers who called themselves the Dark Circle and quietly bankrolled the entire war. They were respectable-looking men with money and connections who had decided a Hells Angels monopoly over Quebec was bad for all of them, so they poured resources into keeping the Rock Machine standing, and the money kept coming from places the Angels could not easily reach. It was one of the reasons a club that should have folded in months fought on for years, and the Angels made them pay for every one of those years, hunting the Rock Machine's leadership one by one, gunning them down at restaurant tables and shooting them in their own living rooms. But the club would not break. When gunmen ambushed the Quebec City chapter president Marcel Demers outside a corner store and put at least 5 bullets into his back and arm, he did not die on the pavement the way he was supposed to. He dragged himself back behind the wheel of his own car, drove himself to the hospital, walked into the emergency room under his own power, and lived. That was the kind of stubbornness that kept the smaller club in the fight long past the point it should have folded. Their founders fell one after another, and still the survivors kept coming. They even tried to change the entire shape of the war. Faucher understood a small local club could not beat a global empire alone. So in 1997, he flew to Stockholm with 2 other Rock Machine leaders to ask the Bandidos, the Angels' great rivals in the Nordic War, to bring their weight into Quebec. Swedish police detained the delegation and threw them out of the country, but the idea did not die, and it eventually pulled the Rock Machine toward the one alliance big enough to matter. That is why the rock machine belongs on any list of the enemies the Hells Angels fear. Almost no one on Earth had ever chosen to fight the Angels head-on, and the few who did were usually crushed fast and forgotten. The rock machine proved something more unsettling to the Angels than a defeat ever could. They proved the mighty Hells Angels could be reached and humiliated and fought to a standstill by a club a fraction of their size over more than 160 bodies and 8 relentless years, simply because those men refused to kneel. The Angels won in the end, but they never forgot how close a handful of the outnumbered came to making them lose. Niels Poulsen. There were about 150 people inside the Hells Angels clubhouse in Copenhagen on the night of October 6, 1996, because the Angels were holding a party. Posters had gone up around the neighborhood inviting ordinary people in, and one of them had been seen by a 29-year-old local woman named Jana Krohn, who had no connection to any club and came along the way anyone might. Across the street, a Bandidos prospect named Niels Poulsen climbed into position with a weapon that belonged on a battlefield, not a residential street in a European capital, and steadied it on his shoulder. It was a Carl Gustaf recoilless anti-tank rifle, stolen from a Swedish army depot, a shoulder-launched weapon built to punch through the armor of a tank. He aimed it at the clubhouse full of Hells Angels, and he fired. The rocket did to a concrete wall what it was designed to do to armor. It punched clean through and exploded inside. 2 people died in the blast. One was a Hells Angels prospect named Louis Linde Nielsen. The other was Jana Krohn, the woman who had come because of a poster on a lamppost, and she became the first civilian killed in the entire Nordic Biker War. 19 others were wounded, and among them was the national president of the Danish Hells Angels himself, who had been inside the building his enemy had just fired a military weapon into. That single act is what shows how far the Bandidos were willing to go against the Angels, because this was not a knife in a bar or a pistol in the dark. It was war-grade hardware turned on a Hells Angels clubhouse full of people, and it told the Angels that the enemy facing them in Scandinavia would reach for weapons no rival had ever dared use before. What makes it stranger still is who fired it. Poulsen was not a made man or a senior enforcer. He was a prospect, the lowest rank in the club, someone still trying to earn his patch, and the way he chose to prove himself was to shoulder a rocket built to kill tanks and fire it into a crowd. They caught him because he had injured himself doing it. In the act of firing the weapon, Poulsen hurt his own eye, and he left behind a blood-stained ski mask on the rooftop, and the DNA on that mask was all investigators needed to put him at the scene. He was convicted and sentenced to life. And his was not even the only rocket fired in that war, because anti-tank weapons stolen from military depots had been loosed at clubhouses across Denmark and Sweden and Finland. But it was Poulsen's rocket and Jana Krohn's death that changed the country. Until that night, the Danish public had been able to watch the war from a comfortable distance, as something that happened only to men who had chosen to be in it. A civilian killed by a military rocket at a party collapsed that distance completely, and the reaction was immediate. Within 9 days, the Danish parliament passed the Rockerloven, the Rocker Act, giving police the power to evict biker clubs from their clubhouses, and the Prime Minister went on national television to call the attack abominable. 1 prospect, 1 stolen rocket, 2 dead, and a nation rewrote its own laws in less than 2 weeks. That is the scale of what the Bandidos were willing to bring to their war with the Hells Angels, and it is the reason the Angels never again made the mistake of underestimating the enemy across from them in the north. Michael Lerche, Olsen. The Hells Angels wanted 1 man dead more than they wanted almost anything in the Nordic War, and with everything they had, they could not do it. On June 4, 1997, they packed a van with somewhere between 30 and 50 kilograms of explosives, parked it outside the Bandidos headquarters in Drammen, Norway, and detonated it, leveling the entire building to rubble. The bomb was built to kill 1 man. He walked out of the burning wreckage alive, and it was not even the first time they had tried, because by then the campaign to kill Michael Lerche Olsen had already been running for nearly a year, and it had already left a body behind that was not his. Olsen had earned that kind of hatred with a single choice. He had been the president of the Hells Angels Copenhagen chapter before he was expelled. And expelled men in that world are expected to disappear, to go quiet and fade away, and be grateful they are still breathing. Olsen did the opposite. He crossed the one line the Angels treated as absolutely unforgivable. He joined the Bandidos, and not as a foot soldier scraping for a place. He became European Sergeant-at-Arms, the enemy's chief enforcer across the entire continent. A former Hells Angels president was now running discipline and violence for the club the Angels were at war with. And to them, that was a betrayal that could only be answered one way. He had to die. What followed was the most sustained and determined effort to kill a single man in the whole war, and it escalated every time it failed. On July 15, 1996, Olsen was riding through Mjøndalen in Norway, heading toward the Bandidos chapter in Drammen. And he was not alone. Beside him rode a bodyguard named Jan Krogh Jensen, a man whose entire purpose that day was to keep Olsen alive. They were ambushed on the road, and Jensen was shot in the head and killed, and when police reconstructed the scene, they concluded he had died in the exact position his employer was meant to occupy. Olsen survived. The intended target lived, and the man protecting him did not. Then, less than a year later, came the van in Drammen, 30 to 50 kilograms of explosives that flattened a building. And again, the person who died was not Olsen at all. It was a 51-year-old woman named Irene Kievold, driving past at the exact wrong second, killed along with 22 others who were injured in the blast. Twice the Angels came for one man with military-grade force. Twice the only people who died were the ones who happened to be standing near him. He is not here for what he did to the Hells Angels. He is here for what they could not do to him. An entire outlaw organization mobilized everything it had, an ambush on an open road and a bomb powerful enough to destroy a building, aimed all of it at one man and failed completely, leaving nothing behind but the bodies of a bodyguard doing his job and a woman driving home. After the war, Olsen became one of the most symbolically loaded figures in the entire history of European biker conflict, and not for any act of his own. He mattered for what his survival proved. In a war defined by how ruthlessly the Hells Angels hunted their enemies, Lerche Olsen stood as living proof that some enemies they simply could not finish. And a club that can produce a man the Angels threw 2 assassination attempts at and still could not kill is a club even the Hells Angels have every reason to fear. The Nordic Biker War. The most powerful outlaw club on earth does not shake hands with its enemies, it buries them. But on September 25, 1997, the president of the Hells Angels in Europe stood in a Danish television studio, live, in front of the entire country, and shook hands with the president of the Bandidos. They were there to end a war, and the simple fact that the Hells Angels had to end it by agreement rather than by victory is the clearest answer there is to the question of who they fear. This was the one war the Angels could not simply win. For 3 years, the Bandidos had matched them across 4 countries at once. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland became interconnected battlegrounds where an attack in one nation triggered a retaliation in another within days, and the 2 clubs coordinated across national borders with the discipline of the military hierarchies they had always modeled themselves on. The weapons that moved through the conflict were unlike anything in the history of the outlaw world. Machine guns, hand grenades, landmines, and anti-tank rockets, most of them stolen from Scandinavian military depots in a string of raids, then fired at clubhouses on residential streets in European capitals. Car bombs went off in city centers. Over the span of the war, Bandidos and their support clubs alone were suspected in dozens of break-ins at army weapons stores, and the hall that fed the fighting ran to more than a dozen anti-tank missiles, machine guns, hundreds of handguns, automatic rifles, and hundreds of grenades and mines. This was not a gang feud. It was low-grade warfare fought with the tools of a national army. The violence reached everywhere, and it reached people who had chosen no part of it. In March 1996, Hells Angels members ambushed a group of Bandidos in the parking lot of Copenhagen's Kastrup Airport, killing a chapter president and wounding 3 others in a public terminal where ordinary travelers were passing through. Rockets were fired into clubhouses full of people. A civilian woman was killed at a party by an anti-tank round. Another was killed driving past a bomb. By the time it ended, 11 people were dead. 74 attempted murders had been logged, and roughly 96 people had been wounded, and 2 separate governments had been forced to rewrite their own laws in the middle of the conflict, because nothing they had was built to contain what 2 motorcycle clubs had unleashed on their streets. What made this war different from every other on this list is that the Hells Angels did not hold the upper hand and could not take it. The Bandidos in Scandinavia were not a small regional club to be swept aside. They were a rival of nearly equal strength, organized, heavily armed, and willing to escalate every single time. And for 3 years, they gave the Angels back exactly what they got, bomb for bomb and body for body. When the Angels reached for their usual answer, overwhelming force, the Bandidos met it and raised it, until both sides were staring at a level of destruction neither could survive much longer. So they stopped, and the way they stopped is the admission that puts this war so near the top. It did not end with the Hells Angels standing over a defeated enemy. It ended with a negotiated peace, brokered between the 2 presidents as equals, quietly dividing Scandinavian territory between the clubs down to individual bars and nightclubs. None of it disclosed to the public who had lived through the bombings. The most powerful outlaw organization on the planet had gone to war with the Bandidos, and come out of it not with a conquest, but with a treaty, because the alternative was a bloodletting that would have destroyed them both. Every other enemy on this list made the Hells Angels bleed. Only the Bandidos, in the Nordic War, made them sit down at a table as equals and sign. Big Jim Tinndahn. When the Nordic War finally ended, it ended with 2 men shaking hands on live Danish television. One led the Hells Angels in Europe. The other had started the whole war on purpose, and his name was Jim Tinndahn. Tinndahn built the Scandinavian Bandidos from almost nothing. He came up through a series of small Danish clubs, and in 1993 he brought his crew into the Bandidos, giving them their first chapter in Scandinavia. The Hells Angels allowed it on one condition, that the Bandidos stay in their 2 existing chapters and not expand. Tinndahn had no intention of obeying. In January 1994, he reached across the water into Helsingborg, Sweden, and brought in another club as a Bandidos chapter, and that single deliberate move enraged the Malmö Hells Angels, who declared war. Within months, a local dispute had ignited across all of Scandinavia. Tinndahn had chosen, coldly and knowingly, to break the one rule that kept the peace with the most dangerous club on earth, because he had decided the Bandidos would not live in the shadow of the Angels. He ran the war he had started with the same cold control. By 1995, he was European president, and his own men gave him a nickname, Solkongen, the Sun King, after the absolute monarch Louis XIV, because they understood exactly what kind of ruler he was. He backed retaliation at every turn, and under him the Bandidos matched the Hells Angels blow for blow through 3 years of rockets and car bombs and assassinations, until the Angels were staring at a war they could not end by force. His peak, he commanded 1,600 members across Europe and Asia. Here is what makes him more dangerous than any single killer on this list. No act of violence was ever pinned on Tinndahn personally. His convictions were for minor things, stolen goods and firearms, nothing close to the war he set in motion. He did not need to fire a rocket. He simply decided the war would happen, built the organization to fight it, and then, when it was over, ended it as an equal, sitting across from the Hells Angels and dividing Scandinavia between them bar by bar. Every other enemy on this list hurt the Angels. Tinndahn is the one who forced them to treat the Bandidos as their equal, who made the mightiest club on earth negotiate rather than conquer. The Hells Angels have crushed 1,000 rivals. Jim Tinndahn is the one who made them shake hands, and that is why he is the biker they fear most. The Hells Angels have crushed 1,000 rivals and forgotten their names. But the men here are the ones they could not simply erase. The enemies who killed their presidents, matched their firepower, survived their bombs, and in the end, forced the mightiest outlaw club on earth to sit down and negotiate as equals. Fear in this world is never admitted. It is earned in blood, and every name here earned it. And the Angels are only one club in a much larger and bloodier world, one filled with war starters, mass killers, and men who reshaped whole countries through violence. Click the next video to see the most dangerous bikers in history, ranked.